Hey everybody, how you doing today? I've been rereading this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, and part one deals with the fundamentals of handling people. And chapter one of part one, the chapter title is "If You Want to Gather Honey, Don't Kick Over the Hive." And it basically the chapter starts off by talking about how there was different criminals throughout history who, despite all the bad things they did, they still regarded themselves as like great people, and they really their perspective on it was that they weren't really doing anything wrong. They were kind of defending themselves or helping people or whatever they were doing thought they were doing. So we have to remember that when we're dealing with people, that people are always going to regard themselves very highly. Uh, doesn't matter what walk of life they're coming from. There was a quote in the chapter by B.F. Skinner. It said where it says people and animals learn more from positive reinforcement through focusing on the negative. It talks about criticism. As leaders, should we use criticism? Or as parents, should we use criticism? Or as teachers, should we use criticism? It says criticism causes resentment. It causes people to shut down. Um, it speaks about how President Abraham Lincoln learned throughout his career that criticism is something that never seems to end well. There was a quote by Confucius where he says, "Don't complain about your neighbor's snow on the roof if you have snow on your roof also." So, we should be, before we go talking about somebody else or how high the neighbor's grass is, let's make sure that ours is cut before we do that. Remember, it talks about how people are emotional beings more so than logical. Some people are logical, but most people we're going to deal with come from a place of emotion. So when we criticize them, we kind of hurt them emotionally. This causes them to fight against what we're trying to do, we're trying to say to them. Throughout the chapter, it goes into talking about, it brings Ben Franklin into the chapter. And, at one point, Ben Franklin's life, he decided that, against arguing, against debating, against trying to convince people that his way was the right way, he went to philosophy that he was going to speak bad of nobody, not if any person. It says, quote, "I will speak ill of no man. I will speak the good of each man that he deals with." And the chapter goes on to talk about, instead of condemning people, we should try to understand them. So, instead of condemning or going to our next door neighbor and condemning them for not having the grass lined up perfectly, let's try to understand why it's that way. And the chapter ends with a quote. It says, "If God doesn't judge people until the end of days, then why should we judge people? If God himself is not going to judge people until the end of time, why should we do it now while we're living?" And that's basically what chapter one of part one was about. Was about learning not to condemn, not to criticize, not to put people down, because it doesn't get you anywhere. It'll just cause people to shut down and fight against what you're trying to do as the leader, or whatever your position is. Chapter two of fundamentals of handling people. The title of the chapter is "The Big Secret of Dealing with People." And the first sentence of the whole chapter begins with, "The only way that we really can get people to do something is by getting them to want to do it themselves." It talks about how we can, you want your children to eat their vegetables, and you could grab them and make them eat the vegetables, and they will eat them. They might eat them in front of you, but as soon as you turn your back, they're not going to do it on their own. So you have to get them to want to do it because they want to do it. They talk about Sigmund Freud in the book in chapter 2. It says, and he talked about how the two main driving desires that people have are the desire for sex and the desire to be great. And those are the two inspirations that most of us have to do things in life. Dr. Dewey, who they talked about in the chapter, he talks about how all people have a desire to be important. And our deepest desire in life is to feel appreciated. So like, if somebody's in a relationship or somebody's working for you, or they want to know that they are appreciated. All people want to know that. It's a craving, in fact, that we have to feel appreciated. We all want to feel important. They go on to talk about Charles Schwab, who was a legendary figure in the steel industry. He was paid millions of dollars. One of the first people to ever do that, be paid that much for his services. And the reason why they say that he was paid so much is because he knew how to deal with people, how to deal with his employees, how to deal with potential customers. And Schwab was asked, why was he so great? And he talks about how he didn't feel he was that great, but his greatest attribute was his ability to arouse enthusiasm and in his employees. He was able to arouse enthusiasm, and he said he did that by showing them appreciation and by encouraging them. Instead of downing them, he encouraged them. And instead of criticizing them, he showed them appreciation. It talks about the fine line between flattery and sincere appreciation. They talk about not flattering people. Flattering is a false thing, and people can tell when you're trying to flatter them. They can tell that you're really not sincere. So when you give appreciation, be sincere and let it come from the heart. And it talks about appreciation. The difference between appreciation and flattery is appreciation comes from the heart. Flattery comes from the teeth. Here's what Emerson said in the chapter. They quoted Emerson. We can learn from every person that we encounter. Every person that we encounter is in some way our superior. They know something. They can do something that we can't. So we need to appreciate those differences and those different strengths that people have that we can learn from. The end of the chapter talks about figuring out the good things in people and not the bad. So we need to figure out the good and not the bad. What's good about my neighbor as opposed to what's bad about my neighbor? Once again, these are the first two chapters of the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Part one of the book is about the fundamentals of handling people. Chapter one, once again, talks about eliminating criticism, negative criticism from your handling of people. And chapter two talks about learning how to truly appreciate the people who you're dealing with, or you might be leading, or the people who are following you, or learning how to appreciate. So once again, this is a little summary of chapters 1 and 2 of How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's an awesome book. You guys should check it out. You should read the book, and you'll get a lot out of it. Thank you.